Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the How Do I Become podcast. This is Chris Gouveia, your host. In this episode, we'll be exploring management consultant. I wanted to encourage everyone to go to our website, howdoibecomepodcast.com, where you can find all of our episodes and episode extras. Thanks as always. All right, welcome to the podcast, Sonam Rajaram, McKinsey consultant. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, what does a consultant do? I know I've heard this term in the news, and I followed it when Pete Buttigieg was in the Democratic race, all his work at McKinsey. But tell me about your work as a consultant and what McKinsey does.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, consultant is a broad term and can be somewhat nebulous. So, I would narrow down what McKinsey does a little bit more to management consulting. And essentially, that means we work with companies, and not even always companies. Sometimes we work with state governments, nonprofit organizations, so a wide variety of organizations to help them solve problems. And that's super broad, but it really can be a wide variety of problems that arise for businesses. It can be, decreased revenue, decreased profitability, things like that. It can be helping organizations become more efficient at different processes and things like that. So it's basically taking an external perspective to a problem that an organization is having.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to be sensitive to non-disclosures, but can you give me some examples of maybe some of the work you've done to maybe highlight that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked primarily in the healthcare practice,
Hmm.
focusing on hospital operations, making hospitals more efficient. So one of my favorite projects that I had was working with a hospital to improve their day of surgery operations. So from the minute a patient walks in the door to when they're leaving the operating room, how can we address inefficiencies in that process? So, from anything from making registration more streamlined to moving various things that happen on the day of surgery to prior to the day of surgery, so you're not encountering any kind of surprises that can delay surgery on the day of surgery.
Okay, perfect. And so your expertise is in healthcare. So you and I met when I was a resident at Northwestern in Chicago, where you were doing general surgery at the time, and you've since obviously pivoted to management consulting. Can you tell me about how you became interested in McKinsey consulting and kind of what the path was you took to get there?
I, uh, you're right, was a general surgery resident at Northwestern, and a little bit, general surgery is anywhere from a 5 to 7 year residency. And sort of halfway through my third year of residency, I recognized that I wasn't enjoying it as much as you need to be a surgeon. So when you're a surgeon, you have to love operating. You have to be excited to get out of bed in the middle of the night and go operate.
Sure.
And that just wasn't something that I found myself enjoying as much as you need to. And so I started thinking about leaving residency and left at the end of my third year without a plan, which I do not recommend. But luckily, I had spoken to an emergency department resident that was in consulting at a different firm. And the way he described it was very, very cool. So like I described it earlier, helping organizations with their problems. And as you know, being a physician is all about problem solving. It's
Hmm.
just in a little bit tighter time frame than what we have on the consulting side. Um, so it sounded like something I could do. I have absolutely no business background. I was a biology major in undergrad and went straight to med school. But McKinsey has a track record of hiring physicians. And so
Hmm.
I saw a post on LinkedIn from McKinsey about doctors at McKinsey. And it sounded so cool. And it sounded like that was a firm that knew what to do with people that didn't have a business background. And so I applied not only there, but to a couple other firms. But McKinsey was very attractive for me because, like I mentioned, they had a track record of hiring physicians And also, they had a program, not a program, a group within McKinsey called McKinsey Implementation. And that is a group of consultants that focus on ensuring that our clients are able to implement whatever solutions we develop with them. And so for me, as a surgery resident, I was always somebody that enjoyed tangible results and seeing what I did. Sometimes that was taking out an appendix and making a person better right away. And so I didn't want to just develop a solution, hand it over to the client, and walk away. So that's why I ended up at McKinsey.
Okay, perfect. Well, your background was in medicine, so it seems interesting that you've now gravitated towards those types of projects. It sounds like. What's the typical path for someone going into management consulting or working at McKinsey?
Typically, we have a cohort of colleagues that come straight from undergrad, and those are called business analysts.
Hmm.
They tend to focus on data and analytics on any given project. There are also consultants that come from business backgrounds. They join right after getting their MBA, and those
Mm-hmm.
are called associates. And the path is very similar for the two. They're both sort of entry level positions, and then you move on through the ranks to various folks, ending at partner for some folks and senior partner for some folks that stay even longer.
Okay, interesting. Can you tell me some more about those pathways and kind of how that might differ from your own pathway?
My pathway was exactly the same. I entered as an associate focused on implementation. So
Okay.
it would have been the same as someone coming from an MBA background. We also have folks that join after getting their PhDs and folks
Mm-hmm.
that join after getting their law degrees. If you have any kind of graduate degree, generally you tend to join as an associate.
Okay, understood. And then once you're in, you mentioned kind of the associate level, then you move to kind of the partner level. What's the usual steps through?
Yep. After being an associate for generally on average, it's 2 years. You move on to being an engagement manager where, any given team will have an engagement manager plus two or three business analysts and or
Mm,
associates.
okay.
Then after that, you move on to associate partner and then senior partner.
Are the salary changes based on what level you are during your time there?
Yes, generally you have a raise of some sort at the end of every year, but bigger salary bumps come with certain promotions for sure.
Mhm. And for many people, as they're navigating this, they do step out of McKinsey because it seems like McKinsey is also a stepping stone for many people. Can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely. A lot of people, spend a few years at McKinsey and then realize that they are interested in trying something else. So they join what we call industry, which is a broad term again to mean not McKinsey. And folks have gone on and done all kinds of things. They join Fortune 500 companies, they enter public sector. One of our partners just became the president and CEO of the Washington football team.
Wow,
So it's definitely a broad range of next steps coming out of McKinsey.
very cool. What's a typical work week like for you?
On the consulting side, I would say pre-COVID, we were traveling every week to the client
Mm,
site. That generally meant leaving home Monday morning, spending 3 to 4 days at the client site, and usually flying home Thursday afternoon or evening. And then Friday, you're at your home office. So you're working from home. You can either work from home, but a lot of people choose to go into the office on Fridays because it's good to
mhm.
see everybody that you would typically see in your home office.
Yeah, and how long do these projects typically span for where you're doing those weekly visits to the job site?
It depends on the project. I would say because I did implementation, my projects tended to be longer, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, because it takes that long to implement a solution and make sure it's
Yeah,
working.
right,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, strategy projects can be a little shorter, anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 weeks,
Mhm.
usually.
Can you speak to some of the pros and cons of the field? I mean, I think we're mentioning travel and time away from home, but can you speak to what the pros and cons have been for you in this role?
Absolutely. Pros, I would say is just a wide exposure to a variety of things in any given field. So I chose to focus on healthcare because of my background, but coming out of business school, you can focus on anything you want. You can focus
Mm.
on oil and gas, you can focus on pharmaceuticals, you can focus on retail, you can uh, dabble in a little bit of everything if you're trying to figure out, what you're interested in. And that kind of experience, I think, is just invaluable without, having 10 different jobs.
Yeah.
It's a great way to understand sort of the issues that are facing any given industry. I also think that the people I've worked with at McKinsey are just some of the most intelligent, driven people that are also incredibly kind and fun to be around. And I think the reason I've stayed at the firm for so long is because I really, really love the people that I work with.
Sure. That's great. Cons?
Cons, I would say for sure the travel can be challenging. Initially, I really enjoyed it. And I
Right.
think,
Absolutely.
yeah, being on site with the client, working hand in hand with them is really, really rewarding. After a while, it gets tiring to be on the road every single week, but for me, it worked really well for the 3.5 years that I was traveling every week.
The schedule seems a little bit more manageable than medicine, which you can obviously compare it to.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the few people that are like, this lifestyle isn't so bad. Um, I would say the weekday work can be somewhat challenging, but even then, we start at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're done at the client site by 5 or 6 o'clock, and then we, sometimes get dinner together as a team, or go work out individually, or even
Mhm.
go work out together as a team. I've done that too. Um, and then go back and do a couple hours of work in your hotel room. But again, I never worked weekends. I You can be pretty clear about what works well for you, and what works well for me is sleeping. So
Yeah, sure.
I set boundaries where, if something needs to get done, I don't stay up late at night working on it. I try and get it done during normal hours.
Yeah, that's great. Seems like a really nice ability to have some work-life balance and kind of state what's important to you, like you're saying.
Exactly.
Where can individuals find more information about this field? It sounds like you found it on LinkedIn, but you had mentioned there are other large management consulting firms. Can you tell us what some other large ones are and where you could get information about all of these firms?
Yeah, the other two large firms are Bain and Company and BCG, or Boston Consulting Group. There is definitely information on all three of our websites. I would say going to the websites themselves are probably the best. I know following LinkedIn or following McKinsey or any of the management consulting firms on Facebook or LinkedIn. McKinsey does a really great job of profiling different consultants, and
Mm-hmm.
providing links so you can get more in-depth information on what a day in the life looks like, or what they've been working on recently. So following on social media is also a good idea.
Okay, great. What's the interview experience like for a consulting firm and specifically for McKinsey?
So generally, for when you apply to a management consulting firm, you are going to have to do something called a case interview, which is essentially working with your interviewer to solve a business problem.
Mm.
That was definitely something I had no idea how to do. So I will
Yeah, that was my
say,
next question. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'll say that that is a skill that you can develop. And I firmly believe that. Like I said, had no business background, but there are books that you can read. There are people that have set up websites that can give you more information on what a case interview actually entails. The websites that I referred to earlier of the various firms also have information on what a case interview might look like. So I would say don't let that be intimidating. It's definitely something that folks can develop a skill of.
And then once you got in at McKinsey, kind of how did you develop that skill, or kind of what resources were in place to kind of help you maybe speak the language a little bit better than your MBA colleagues?
Yeah, there is once you're there at McKinsey specifically, there is both formal and informal training that happens. So at various junctures in your tenure, you go and you join folks from all across the country and sometimes the world at training on
Wow.
site where you are developing soft skills, if you will. There's
Hmm.
also industry specific trainings that McKinsey hosts where I went and learned about various issues in healthcare. And there's a lot of informal on the job training that happens. Day to day, we use a lot of Excel and PowerPoint, and I had very rudimentary knowledge of both of those. But I worked with some incredible people that were very patient and taught me so much about both of them. So it's definitely, and that's an expectation. Not only are people willing to do it, but they're expected to do that. And
Oh, great.
professional development is a huge part uh, of the McKinsey experience.
And so, professional development wise, I noticed that now you have a title as Chief of Staff for Diversity and Inclusion. Can you tell me a little bit more about that role and what it's been for you and what you're doing in that role?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was traveling every week for work,
Mm.
and initially that was, that worked for me and my family, but I eventually got somewhat weary of the travel. And so McKinsey has an opportunity for consultants to move to internal roles at the firm. And so I, don't have a background in diversity and inclusion, but while at McKinsey, I led various groups that, for women in McKinsey implementation, and developed an interest in diversity and inclusion. So we have a job posting site that lists all the internal roles that are available. And I
Oh.
saw this one and I said, hey, that sounds really interesting. And
Hmm.
so I applied for it, even though I wasn't qualified in the diversity and inclusion front, besides recreational interest in it, but managing operations is what I'd been doing for hospitals. So it was taking that skill that I'd developed at McKinsey and then applying it in this other role.
So, tell me about some of the responsibilities you've had in that role.
Um, the responsibilities can vary day to day, but I oversee all of our hiring onto the team.
Great.
I manage our financial resources. We have business analysts that I mentioned previously that rotate with our team for a year at a time. So I manage that program.
Mm.
Um, Basically, anything having to do with people or other resources on our team, that all is falls into my role.
It sounds great. Sounds rewarding.
Yes, it has been incredible.
Anything else you want to mention about working in management consulting or McKinsey in particular?
I would say, you and I talked about what the traditional management consulting looks like, and traditionally that is somebody that graduated from an Ivy League business school and applied to McKinsey and started this job straight out of business school. That is
Hmm.
changing so much. And we no longer only recruit from Ivy League schools. I personally did not go to an Ivy League school.
Hmm.
We recruit more broadly across all kinds of universities and business schools. As I mentioned, you don't have to have an MBA to work there. I don't have an MBA. Um,
Hmm.
so I would say if it's something that you're interested in, definitely don't let the fact that you don't come from a business school or an Ivy League school stop you from applying.
Yeah, it seems like an interest and passion for big challenges, for making change, and working with a diverse set of people and problems maybe is kind of the underlying source for people that want to work in management consulting. That's we've talked about broad multiple times, but I think that's one of the challenges for people when it comes to being interested in this field without knowing someone in it. But also, it's kind of the interesting part about actually talking to someone that has that experience now being in it. So, thank you so much for the time.
Um, yes. And that's why, whenever folks reach out, I'm always happy to answer questions because so many people helped me figure out what exactly this beast that is consulting is.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, Sonam. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.